Hi, I'm the Warrior Witch, and you can call me LAKEY. I feel like this is a glasses off kind of episode because my eyes do be looking cute today. Also, I'm trying a new thing where I'd sweep all of my hair to one side, and I think it's working kind of nice, so we're gonna try this a little while I grow it out. Today we're talking about whether or not quality of supplies matters, as in like, do you have to pay a lot of money for it? Now, I've spoken about this before, and the answer is kind of yes and no. I'm a very firm believer that you can get a lot of stuff for super cheap. You can get some stuff for free by gathering it out in the wild, some stuff you might already have, especially like when it comes to kitchen herbs. But there are going to be some exceptions, and I want to talk a little bit more about ways that you can invest or ways that you can save a little bit of money. It really just depends on what you're looking for and knowing the ups and downs. There's that old, I don't know if it's a proverb, but like analogy, something, I don't know technical terms. There's this old thing about two people buying boots, and it's the poor man and the rich man. The rich man can buy a pair of boots that costs $100 and it'll last him for years and years. The poor man can buy a $25 pair of boots, but they'll break down in a couple months, maybe a year, and he'll have to buy over and over and over again. So by the time that both of those men hit 5 years, the one man will only have spent $100 and the other man will have spent many times that because he has to keep buying more supplies. Now, the boots still work, but he does have to reinvest every single time and the cost tends to add up. Now, when it comes to your supplies, you can mitigate some of this, especially in witchcraft. We've talked about going out and foraging for your own herbs. We've talked about like dollar stores and thrift shops and places like that, secondhand stores, vintage shops. But I definitely want to go over some of the reasons why I tend to splurge a little bit on specific supplies, because there are certain things that while you can do these budget items, there's definitely some drawbacks and it can be worth investing if you have the money for it. There's no shame. There's nothing that, you know, it won't work if you get the cheaper version. Plenty of things will work just the same. It's just that you have to understand that they're going to work a little bit differently, especially in particular with candles, which is my biggest splurge as of recently. Yes, I keep my candles in a pickle jar. Don't worry. So these are actually those Wicca Wicks candles I've talked about before, and I switched to these. They're a little bit pricier, but they're worth it because the old trend candles I was getting were much smaller for one, so these are already more bang for your buck, but they also just didn't burn as nicely. I couldn't do as much on them, so while my old chime candles were cheaper, I decided to invest in these because one, the supplier allows you to buy single color sets, so you can get, I don't know, 10 or 15, something like that, of a single color. So if you use one color more than the other, you can always go out and buy more of those. Like if you use a lot of blue ones or a lot of red ones, you can get all blue or all red. So it's easier to be able to invest in that, but they're also just better quality. So these will burn nicer. They fit in my holders much nicer because they actually fit instead of being too small. So for me, this investment's definitely worth it. Now, the real investment cost of candles for me comes for 7-day glass candles. Now, I don't actually know how long this candle burns for because this is the candle I currently use for Freya, but this candle cost about $10. It doesn't have the price on it anymore, but I think that's how much I paid. And $10 or something like this may seem kind of like a lot, especially when you compare it to a candle like this that you can get for $1 at Dollar Tree. But these candles tend to burn kinda crappy. Every time I burn one of these candles, it ends up half the time about, it'll snuff itself out, it'll drown itself, I have to sort of like scoop out some of the wax to begin with at the top or as it starts getting burned down because it just doesn't have good quality wax in it, so the poor quality wax will eventually just die. It really is just sort of hit or miss, and so if you're using candles like these, you can really risk not having your spells work out because the quality of the actual item said no. It's not about the power, it's just about what you're using. Now they'll still work perfectly fine. I just know that if I have these candles and I'm using them for spell work or for deity work or whatever, I'm gonna have to take some extra precautions. I may have to take some wax out. If it's a tapered candle like the small ones that I have for the chime candles, usually you don't have this problem. You can get some glass candles that you can get the glass separate, and then you can get one of the bigger ones that slots in that has the tapered top. I definitely recommend those. But again, you're gonna have to be investing in the glass and the candle separately, and often the candle's gonna be a little bit more expensive. The other one is Incense, and you can definitely tell the difference just by looking at them, the two that I'm gonna bring up. Now, I'm very lucky. I happen to actually enjoy the dollar, oh God, I think it's like the Go Nesh or whatever, like the Walmart brand, the gold packets of sandalwood incense, but it's the only one I like of those. It's really cheap quality. I'm shocked that I enjoy the smell at all, but there's only one kind. Now, I have two types, and I've talked about this before, but I actually have it in front of me to be able to show you. This one sucks. This sucks so bad. It smells awful. It's still sandalwood incense. It even costs just a little bit more. It's the other cheap Walmart brand. I think this is like $2 while the other ones are $1. But this is awful. I hate this. This is one of the worst smelling incenses out there. And so it definitely is that, like, if you're buying cheap, you're getting cheap. Oh, it's just no good. Now, this incense we actually found at a metaphysical shop in my hometown, and we've been able to find it a couple of places. Like, if you happen to have rag stocks near you, you might be able to find it there. I think it's the Nag Champa. It's called Super Hit. Highly recommend. This stuff smells so good, but the real difference comes when you look at it. And I'll compare my regular $1 sandalwood incense sticks to this one really up close. Okay, so this is about the best that I can get it for you guys. So the darker one here is my sandalwood incense, and this one is the Nag Champa Super Hit stuff. You can already see it's like flaky and thick. It's bigger than the other one is too, like the size is bigger. And when you burn them, you can definitely tell the smell difference. It's so good. Any incense I've ever found that looks like this smells amazing. It is so much more higher quality. I absolutely 10 out of 10 recommend. It's so good. As a side note, we've gotten packets of those before, obviously, and they leave behind some of that dust. If any of you have any incense that's similar to that, or is that one actually, let me know if you can burn that dust on like a charcoal disc, because we want to experiment with it, but I don't know if it'll work out. Moving on. Now, I don't know that I've actually said this before on my channel, but you can print your own tarot cards. There are PDF files of Rider-Waite-Smith deck art, I believe. Otherwise, you can make your own. You could draw it out yourself, but you could print your own Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck, or just any version tarot deck if the PDF is free and available and legal and all that stuff. But, you know, there's absolutely, like, make your own stuff. So sorry, I'm trying to get it out of the bag here, but you can absolutely make your own. Now, my old roommate actually did this herself, where she got some computer paper and managed to print off a tarot deck. So you'll want thicker paper, because, you know, if you're gonna be shuffling or, you know, wear and tear, you probably want to invest in some cardstock for it perhaps, but buying cardstock and then printing is usually cheaper than going for a nicer tarot deck, especially because some of them can be a little pricey if you are on a very tight budget. But like, she tea stained it herself, so, you know, all this brown, nice quality edging on it. It's gorgeous. And, you know, she didn't have to go out and try to find one in person, try to buy one online, not knowing what the quality of the paper was going to be like, sight unseen. It can be kind of risky if you don't know the quality of the tarot deck and you can't really find any reviews on it. So you'll know the quality of the paper you're getting if you get cardstock. It's not going to be the best thing necessarily. It might fall apart after a while because most regular tarot decks are going to be protected. But, you know, if you're on a tight budget, you can do that. Now, because I don't want to risk my tarot decks falling apart, I tend to invest in them, but I don't buy very many at all. I'm very selective about my decks, and I really make sure this is what I want, because I'm usually investing $20, $30, $40, $50. Some of them can be a little pricey, and I have one that I have my eye on right now that's about $25 or $30, and I'm waiting because I know it's good quality and I know I want it, but I don't need it right now, so I'm just waiting. Plus, I already have a few of my own, so I don't exactly not have a tarot deck. But the thing is, you can compare printed off computer paper tarot cards to an actual, like, nicely printed, professionally made tarot deck. You can see the quality of it. Usually they're a little bit more, you know, They're thicker, they're a little bit more water resistant, so they're a little bit better to invest in the long run. But that doesn't make the printed off deck any worse. And that's the point I want to stress. The cheaper items are not worse. They're just more likely to fall apart over time or to have some other issues. So it's things to consider in terms of the quality of what you're using. The item itself doesn't make a big difference. It's more about how you use it. But you're gonna have to understand that wear and tear and the actual physical use of an item will be part of that process. So it's something to consider. It wouldn't be witchcraft without herbs, at least not for me. So I want to talk about the quality of your herbs. Now, I've spoken about this before many times. I forage my own herbs. I'll use kitchen herbs from the dollar store. And there's some quite unconventional things, but sometimes I want to splurge a little bit. Sometimes there's witchy shops that will have very specific things that you can't really get in other places. Like, I can't usually go to the grocery store and get mugwort. It's just not as much of an option. Sometimes they won't have all of the herbs I want, but the witchy store nearby does, and getting it anywhere else would be much more expensive. And here's the reason why I buy from witchy shops sometimes instead of like kitchen herbs. If you don't need a lot, you know, you only need a couple of things of this particular herb, you don't want to buy an entire container of it if you don't think you'll be using it a lot. So I personally would rather invest a couple of bucks. Usually they're not that expensive. I think I've gotten some herbs for between $2 and $5 at witchy stores. But it's an investment for me to know whether or not I'll be using it, because if I still have my small baggie of it 6 months later, probably a good thing I didn't invest in something else that might have been a couple of bucks, but then I just have it sitting there. You know, I don't want to have the supplies just going to waste in my house. But I want to show kind of the ways that I, in many ways, get my herbs for different prices. So we'll start with free 99. That's getting it yourself out in the wild. So this is my container of goldenrod. I picked it all myself. I dried it myself. I just hung it up on. I actually dried my herbs for a long time. I would tie them up with string, and then I would tie that string to a clothes hanger and then just hang it up, like on the wall or in my closet or wherever I had the space for it, just somewhere open. But yeah, I would just dry herbs on a clothing hanger. Like, it worked. If it works for you, just do it. You know, you got the supplies at home, why not? But yeah, free 99, you can go out and get it yourself, as long as it is something that is not endangered, and foraging laws and all those things, you know, the mundane yada yada. Make sure you check in on your foraging laws, it's really important. But anyway, so I had some mason jars, so I've just put it inside here, and now anytime I need some goldenrod, I have a nice little container. Next up would be, usually it's like $1 if you can get it at the dollar store. My dollar store doesn't have as much, but you know, bigger cities might have more things in them. So I will get grocery store herbs from either like Walmart or the Dollar Tree. So this is some basil. I actually label my little jars. I think it's kind of cute, but they don't necessarily sit perfectly. So I just do what you do. Yeah, so this is some grocery store herbs. It was just some basil. We got a slightly larger container of it, so I just put it in this nice little jar instead of having it in the plastic one, so that we could, you know, use that for other stuff. And it fits nicely in here. I could scoop it out a little bit nicer. But this, you know, didn't cost me very much money, and you can get it kind of anywhere. Any kitchen herbs, honestly, get those at like the dollar store or the grocery store. You don't need to get basil at a witchy shop. You also don't need to grow it yourself. You know, you can grow basil if you want. That is arguably maybe the cheapest option, because you can just keep refreshing it, and especially things like basil and catnip you can make into bigger and bigger bushes, but the grocery store works just fine. You know, the quality of getting it at like the organics Whole Food store or whatever isn't going to be any better or worse for magical purposes than the dollar store. It's honestly not. Next would be a more limited supply generally, so this isn't going to be something that you can do for every herb, but for select herbs I would definitely say tea. I like doing this especially for chamomile, just because I do tend to use chamomile quite a bit. I'll use it in money spells a lot. You can use it for, you know, calming, things like that. All the uses that chamomile has, but specifically for me, chamomile is one of those things that I don't want to go to a witchy store to buy, and it's not necessarily going to be an herb you can just get in the herb section. So you can just straight up rip open a tea bag. Like, this is an option. It's upside down. I'll get there. So this is totally an option. Like, don't be afraid to just go get some tea. And depending on where you are and what flavors are available, there's lots of other things you can get, especially as it relates to certain herbs that may be a little bit less common or that you only need a little bit of. If you can get a small packet of tea or tea bags, you know, this isn't very much. I don't need very much. One tea packet does me pretty well for 1 or even 2 spells, depending on how much I need. And then as mentioned, the more expensive option is going to be little supplies from witch stores. This is some star anise. I've used some already. I think there were 4 or 5 in here originally, but this little baggie cost me $3.50. So, you know, it's more expensive than going to the dollar store. And the problem is that we don't have any whole anise. We have ground anise, and that can work, but I really wanted the actual like whole thing. I wanted the actual fully intact herb. So I didn't really have any places that sold any of that aside from the witchy store, which is great because I like to support my witchy store anyway, and I now have a little bit more cash to spare than I used to. So, you know, I can drive out there and spend $4 or $5 on a pack of herbs. And I didn't know if I was gonna be using it a lot. I still have this. It's been probably 7-8 months. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but close to there. Maybe 7-8 months since I bought this, and I still have some in here. So I'm clearly not using it a whole lot. So now I know that it's not a thing that I would need to go out and hunt for a larger container of, because as of right now, I'm not really using it all that much. If I end up running through it very quickly in a short amount of time, maybe I'll go and invest in this again and then see if I go through it and then get a larger container's worth. But you know, this for me, in the long run, saves me money. I'm not spending $10 on a bigger container that never gets used up. I'm spending $3.50 to use a little of it, and I've gotten the uses out of it, and I don't feel like I'm wasting supplies. I'm losing light, so I gotta be fast. It's so dark here so early. Final thing I definitely like to invest in some cases for certain reasons, is going to be my journaling supplies. I still use my dollar store notebooks and folders, absolutely. They are such a staple in my practice right now. Like these that I had on my budget witch haul. I now invested, I think it was like $3 instead of $1 this time around, but I got a new set of folders. They're so cute, I love them so much, I couldn't resist. I just couldn't pass them up, but you know, they were only a couple of bucks. But you know, super, super cheap folders, super cheap notebooks. I still use them for sure. Now the only problem is, I like to use ink that tends to bleed a little bit on cheaper paper. So cheap notebooks tend to be kind of cheap, and my notes will end up bleeding a little bit, and that makes them kind of illegible if I'm writing kind of fast and kind of small. If my letters are tightly spaced, it can definitely be an issue. Now again, you don't have to buy anything special. You can just do, you know, regular like ballpoint pen on the paper, or pencil. Pencil for me tends to smudge. It's just my personal way of doing what I'm doing. And I also like to add illustrations to my notes a lot of the time, so if I want to use any form of color, you know, it bleeding or ghosting, which is showing up on the back of the page, can be kind of an issue for me. So I try to invest in slightly higher quality paper. And this is in 2 different ways. Mainly it's in the notebooks that I've made myself. So I'll find you a page that I don't mind sharing, because, you know, books of shadows and grimoires and stuff are always gonna be a little bit more personal to everybody. So I will find one that's a little bit more easy. So I used to work at Hobby Lobby, I don't anymore, but it was where I worked, so I got supplies from there, and I still have these supplies years later. So that's where I got the supplies, but you can get this kind of anywhere. I bought multimedia paper from Hobby Lobby. Decent quality, can hold water, doesn't bleed, doesn't really ghost, great for my needs, and it, you know, it's not really gonna go too bad in like a year or a month or whatever. But I made myself a couple of journals using that paper and that free leather that we had gotten that was getting thrown away that we still have loads of. So the paper was super cheap, and then the leather for it was free, and in a way recycled. But yeah, so I invested in this paper because I knew it was gonna be good quality. It also allowed me to be able to use watercolors. So you can see some of the decoration that I've done here, and if you flip it over to the other side, it doesn't ghost through at all. You can't see any of these markings, and I can use more watercolor on the other side to continue to decorate my paper. It also saved me a little bit of money because I was able to make the book myself, so I didn't have to go out and buy an expensive notebook. I hand bound it, hand stitched it, you know, everything inside is just made by me. So making my own notebooks definitely is a way that I've been able to save a little bit of paper. There's lots of tutorials out there for making your own books at home. You can usually make them super cheap. There's even like going to the dollar store and making your own notebook type supplies. My favorite YouTuber for this is Sea Lemon. She's made a couple of good like notebook journal making things. And they're usually not that expensive. So that's what I use for my tutorials. If you want to know how I did it, I'll probably do a tutorial one day myself and just show you my process. But that's besides the point. Making things always save you a little bit of money. And you know, this is nice and sturdy. It's good thick leather too. So I'm never worried about this getting too damaged. Since it's multimedia paper, I use stuff that can get water on it. I use waterproof ink, which is always gonna be a little bit more expensive, but it's worth it in my eyes. And allows me to work with watercolors. So I know that using those supplies, the waterproof ink, the multimedia paper, stuff that won't easily get damaged were it to get a little bit wet, or if I spilled something on it or whatever, it's gonna hold up over time. And for me, that investment is definitely worth it. There's also options like nice notebooks that you just buy as is instead of making it if you don't have the skills or the time necessary to do it. Maybe if you have motor function issues, just getting a nice already done notebook can also be a good option. Look into watercolor sketchbooks or multimedia sketchbooks. That way you have the blank paper and the quality is going to be a little bit nicer. What I have here is a moleskin notebook. It opens, it's supposed to be this way, I think. It's really nice watercolor paper. Now I will say, watercolor paper tends to have a little bit of tooth to it. So if you're using nicer quality pens, it will push that tip down over time. It'll wear it down and start to sort of make it get damaged. So I would just make sure that what you're using, you're okay with that happening to, or you know can be used on watercolor paper without much risk to damage. If you want to get slightly smoother watercolor paper, for non-artists out there, hot press paper is the one that's going to be smoother. Cold press paper is going to be much more textured. But even cheap watercolor notebook paper, like that's usually going to be an all right quality for you, but you don't have to worry too much. And you know, you get it nicely bound, you don't have to worry about anything. And my thing about moleskin notebooks is that in the back, they come with these pockets. There we go. Yeah, you can see it now. So they come with these pockets inside, so you could store like little sheets of information that you have yet to put inside. You could put things that you've picked up, like if you found a feather on the ground or a particular leaf or a small bit of a plant outside. You know, you could keep it in that notebook while you're walking around. You could take observations. You could draw your surroundings and, you know, take notes on what you see and what it is and identifying. Lots of uses, but you know, having a nice quality notebook helps with that. And I just like the ones with the pockets inside. And of course there's always books, but that's an investment that's always gonna be out there. I get both digital and physical books. It just depends on how I'm going to be using it and how often I'm going to be wanting to reference it at any given moment. If I don't need to reference it all the time, I keep it digital. If I want to reference it all the time, I keep it on my actual bookshelves in physical form. You can get them through like Kindle, you can get audiobooks. There's lots and lots of ways that you can buy yourself digital versions of books. And the digital versions of books are often a couple bucks cheaper. I've seen some that are like $15 if you bought the actual paperback version, and it's like $4 if you get the digital version. It's honestly such a steal to get digital legal versions of books, and I definitely think that it can be a great investment for people because you can also get the Kindle app on your PC. I think it's also available for Mac, I'm pretty sure. I have an Amazon Fire, so I can just read it directly there. I can buy from Amazon and have it go directly to that. I can load it up with any other information I've gathered and put into documents. I think the Amazon Fire was a great investment for me, but $50 can be kind of a lot. So if you don't really have the money to invest in that, you can just get books one at a time. You can get the Kindle app and not have to buy an Amazon Fire. So if you just want to keep them completely digital, you can do that. And you don't have to worry about the cost of an actual like reader. I don't honestly see too many downsides on digital books, to be honest. If you like to write in your books, as some people do, that can be a slight downside, but honestly, I can take notes in a separate document while I'm reading a digital book. I don't feel the need to write in my books physically. I always take my notes separately. I just have a complex about it. Some people don't, some people do. I'm just one of those people that I can't really tolerate the thought of writing in a book. I don't know what it is. But yeah, so if you want to take notes like that, and actually, digital versions, that's easier to do. I believe Kindle apps and other reader apps like that allow you to actually highlight within and take notes on the side. So if you're averse to doing that in actual physical books and you don't want to do permanent damage, you can do that all you want in a digital version, and that's pretty cool. So yeah, I think investing in your supplies is important, but it's not always going to be necessary. I think it's important for people to know that the cheaper budget options are out there, but there is also a reason to invest in some of your supplies. And that's not even going into like tools like, candle holders or incense snuffers or athames or chalices, things that will last you longer. And those are a whole other conversation. Tools can get so expensive. I just want to go on the base level of what everybody's probably going to have. You might not necessarily have a chalice, you might not necessarily have an athame, you might not even use those. So I just wanted to go over the base supplies that most people use, most people want to use, most people want to get options for. But we focus a lot on the budget stuff that I think that we sort of forget that there is a reason that we invest in quality items. There's a reason that certain things cost more, and there's a reason that people buy them. It's because you want them to last. And I know that my nicer candles are gonna burn better. So I've tried over time, little by little, because they really do add up. I try to invest in nicer quality candles, and I definitely try to invest in things that will last me a little bit longer, and I'll spend a couple of extra bucks more than I intend to make sure I'm not costing myself more money in the future. I invest in my craft because it's important to me, and I happen to have the money to be able to. If you can't, there's no shame in that. Go to the dollar store. I still do. My supplies still definitely come from the dollar store. I think it's a wonderful resource, and you don't have to spend $100 on a tiny container of herbs that you don't even know you're gonna use. Go with the cheap version, why not? All right, that's all I've got for you guys this week. I'll see you all next time. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter. I'll have my links here, and I also have Patreon if you want to get early content, if you want to have direct access to me through my Discord server. Also, I have a Discord server that'll be linked in the description below, and I'll see you guys next time, so blessed be!